Welcome to our webinar and discussion today on 10 game-changing tips to simplify guide scheduling for your business. Super excited to have our guests here today. We're going to have a really awesome discussion that I hope you have some takeaways, not just of the platform that we're discussing today, but also just some good general tips that you can take away to your business and improve the way that you interact with guide management, scheduling, and everything related to that. So with us today, we have three awesome guests. We have Aaron Farr, who is actually a river guide for the last 5 years. He's also a computer science major and does an incredible job at both of those things. And he has paired those together in a way that we are going to discover today has been very beneficial. He actually spent the last 5 years kind of looking over the shoulder of Carter Lloyd, who's the operations manager for Moab Adventure Center, Western River Expeditions, and watching some of the challenges he had in guide management, guide scheduling, with the way that it was being done and had been done for years. And given Aaron's unique perspective as a guide and also with his computer science mind and as a developer, he started seeing some ways to potentially improve this process. And one thing led to another, and this incredible application was developed that we're going to take a look at today. So we'll look at that. Then we're going to jump into a discussion with Carter and Eric. Carter has been an operations manager for the last 5 years, as I mentioned, for Western River Expeditions, Moab Adventure Center, and has done a phenomenal job there in his role. And a big part of that has to do with scheduling guides. And so he's going to share some of his challenges with us, some of the things he's learned, and how he's used these tools to improve his life and the life of all those that he works with. And then we have Eric, who comes with us from a very unique perspective. Eric Wyaseth, for the last 22 years, has worked in the tour operator industry. He has spent that whole time, in 22 years, he's been guiding throughout those years. He has spent the last 18 years as an operations manager and even as an owner of Orange Torpedo Tours up in Idaho and Oregon. So we're really excited to hear their perspectives on this. And with that introduction, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Aaron. Wondering, Aaron, if you might just give us a little bit of background and your story as to how this all came to be.
There we go. So thank you, Brandon. I guess you kind of put the background into context there. I've been working for Carter for a long time now, or I guess not that long, but feels long to me. And about 3 years ago, started to realize that he was like facing some major issues with guide scheduling. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So this is kind of where we started 3 years ago. We've got this giant spreadsheet that Carter would kind of manage every single day, and this took hours and hours and hours. And it took him a long time. He'd have to like go into ResMark, figure out what the bookings numbers were for the day, and then add assignments with these little color coded boxes, as you can I mean, maybe you'll be able to decipher this just by looking at it, but it took me like 3 weeks to figure out. At any rate, like this was really time intensive. It was labor intensive. Last minute changes to the schedule in ResMark would cause all sorts of issues. Time off requests would kind of get lost in the weeds. And it was really hard to communicate with employees. Like Carter would change something in here, and then he'd have to go in and call all of the different guides affected to make sure that they had seen the update. Um, and we got like all sorts of things going on, like different employees were qualified to run different tours. And it's just like this really big monster that Carter was dealing with um, every single day. It was taking him so much time. Back then or I guess that 3 years ago, we kind of decided to try and fix this problem, build a system that could help automate a lot of these manual things that he was having to deal with. And that's kind of where TrackUp got started, the origin story. And so this is kind of the inside of TrackUp. I've already like logged in and kind of navigated to a point where you can see, but it's the same thing you were just looking at, and that calendar view with all the different employees on the trips. And this thing pulls all of the data from Resmark automatically. So if you have a tour that you need to schedule, it'll just pull it into the calendar here. So you don't have to synchronize with Resmark. If we open one of these up, I'll have to look at this. Looks like that one doesn't have any people on it. So you can, if you open this up, you can see how many passengers are in there, what guides are scheduled, what their job is, like I guess what employees are scheduled more generally. And so the idea here is mainly solving those problems that Carter was facing. And throughout the process of doing that, we decided that this is probably something that a lot of tour operators are kind of having issues with. Like they need scheduling, it responds to changes very quickly, and needs to kind of integrate with that booking software. Um, and so we set this up and started working with Carter and Eric and lots of different clients, and have kind of come to the point today where we feel like it's a really cool system that can help people really change the way they're scheduling and make it a lot easier. We got like time off requests, employees have a mobile app that they can view their schedule and any relevant data in there. And just lots of different features in there that are geared towards tour operators and the way that they have things set up.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. That's a great overview in terms of why the system was created and generally how it works. We're going to dive into some details with Carter and Eric as to how they actually implemented the system and some of the things they've learned just in general about, managing guides and so forth over the years. But maybe Carter, let's start with you and maybe just walk us through a little bit of some of the challenges you were having before this. Aaron touched on those a little bit, but I'm sure you lived and breathed it every day. Share some of those thoughts with us and kind of what that whole thing looked like for you before this.
Sure. Yeah, kind of like what Aaron had showed on his screen. The way that we were scheduling was based off a spreadsheet, which worked. We got the job done, but some of the challenges that we were dealing with were getting the trips imported. I'd have to manually go ahead and import these trips from Resmark into this spreadsheet. I'm going to go ahead and share just so I can illustrate what I'm talking about here. 1 second. Let's see. Tab over. So I'd have to come up here. I'd have to have two different computer screens. It was really like it looked like a madman in a lab trying to get this schedule worked out. So I would take the trips from Resmark and I'd put them up at the top here, and I would have our different trips that we run, and I'd have to, line them all out, and find the dates and cross check and make sure everything lined up. And then once that was built in, I was able to go in and start scheduling. And it works up to a certain point. We could get people scheduled on these trips that we had. These little numbers here were passengers that were scheduled, but this number changes all the time, right? This number can change the day before. It can, and so we're having challenges with that as well. So what the biggest one of the bigger things that TrackUp really helped with is it would integrate directly with Resmark and input those trips in automatically. And any changes that were made, it would update the change automatically, and it would notify me and tell me that something had changed with this trip and that it needed attention to look at. So I would say that that's probably one of the biggest hurdles that we had with this, is that things were getting missed. They were sometimes micro, sometimes really big issues, but things were getting missed, and it just was causing a lot of headache for myself, our staff, and it just, having that issue solved was a big deal. The other one that was getting missed a lot, unfortunately, due to the detriment of our employees, is the way time off requests that we had handled those were done through an email. the guide would shoot me an email, and then it was on me to make sure that I took those dates that they said and put them into the schedule, right? That would require me to not lose that email. And if you run a business, you know that emails come in by the second, it seems like, and they can get missed. And so the time off request is then in TrackUp, the employee can then go ahead and request time off, and it automatically puts it in the schedule, and then I can approve it or deny it. So that solved a big issue there. And then probably the overall kind of theme to why I think TrackUp works is it opens up communication lines between us and the employee a little bit better. It seems like there's a two-way communication instead of, me doing something and then relying on them checking it. They're getting notifications as well, being able to see the changes updated and know exactly what's going on with their schedule that they take a lot of pride and investment in as well. So.
Awesome. So you touched on this a little bit, Carter, but maybe walk us through how some of these things were solved by this new platform and how that changed things for you.
Sure. We'll just tab over to the TrackUp screen. So, like I said, these trips just get imported directly in from ResMark. So on the old guide schedule, I'd have to import manually. You'd have to have two computer screens and import them all. In TrackUp now, these auto populate up here. So these populate. They tell me exactly. We'll just click into this one. This is a Cataract Canyon 4-day trip. This trip is automatically built out. The only thing that I have to do is go in and add guides to this trip. So a lot of the legwork is taken out and a lot of time is saved. Because then I can go in and I can add guides, and usually there's a list of people popped up, but this is a past trip and it's no longer available. But there's a list of staff that is available to run that trip, and I can pick from that list of staff, and I can assign roles that way. So that piece right there has saved hours and hours a week of time.
So when you do that, Carter, does it know which guides, like certain guides can guide certain trips, right?
Correct.
And they're qualified to guide that trip, whereas they might not be qualified to guide another trip. Does it know that? So when you go to select a guide, you're only choosing from the ones who are qualified to do that?
Yeah, correct. So in the old system, I was relying on tabs on the side of the staff, like telling me if they were qualified or not. Like this, you see this EMT, sorry for scrolling, this EMT woofer down the side here. I was relying on just little marks and little colors to tell me if a guide was qualified or not. In this new system, I can go in to my employees here. We'll just take Kelly, for example. And each employee is then given a profile. And in the profile, I can go into their roles and I can select what they can and can't do based on their certification. So for Kelly, since she's an employee that's been with us for a couple of years, she's checked off. She started as a trainee, and then she got checked off to be a guide. She's not this last year. She was not qualified to be a trip leader, so she wasn't able to be assigned a trip leader, but she was able to be assigned as a guide to that trip. And so for each employee, um, I can then go ahead and assign them based on what skill set or what trip they've been checked off on. So if I go to put Kelly as a trip leader on Cataract Canyon, it won't let me do that. It'll throw up a message saying that she's not qualified to do that, but she can be a guide. So.
That's awesome. And you mentioned some of the challenges with scheduling in general. How has that become easier with all of this?
I think like I was talking about earlier, the communication aspect to it has been huge. When you go to make changes in a big spreadsheet like that, you're relying on people to know exactly to check this sheet, to know exactly what they're doing, to decipher what's going on. And I think with TrackUp, it's helped streamline that communication line like tenfold. And it's made not only has it made the staff like the management side easier, but definitely made the employees a lot happier too. So.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you mentioned before, I heard you talking about how before when people could kind of see the whole schedule versus just their schedule, they'd get upset at maybe how much work they're getting compared to someone else. Why is this person on that trip and I'm not? And so forth.
Correct.
And I think this has kind of solved some of that internal those internal challenges with guides sort of looking at each other's schedules, right?
Yeah, definitely. I can hit on that real quick. So with this old way of doing it, everybody could see everything. That's the only way for them to have access to it is to share it with everybody. And so it's pretty funny. Me and another one of the operations managers would joke that anytime we go and make changes, we're pretty sure the employees had notifications because all their little dots would pop up at the top saying they're looking at what you're doing. And sometimes you need to make changes that aren't permanent. You're just trying to see where they fit. And with everyone seeing those changes or seeing what all the other trips that everyone else is on, sometimes there's some comparison, and sometimes, there's maybe even some feelings getting hurt that someone's on a trip and they're not. And it was causing some issues amongst the staff between each other, but also, people would ask why they're not on a certain trip or why this person's on that. With TrackUp, you know, um, they can only see their schedule and who's scheduled on their trip. So it saved a lot of issues that way. They know what they're doing, they know their schedule, and if someone is scheduled alongside with them, they can also see who's scheduled there. So that solved a lot of issues as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything else you want to point out in the system that's been a lifesaver to you?
Yeah, one more thing I want to hit on, just kind of on the operations side, not so much scheduling, but I don't know how the laws are in different states, but in the state of Utah, there are certain qualifications and things that guides have to have, and one of the things that they have to carry with them is a trip log. They have to be able to produce a log saying that they've ran X amount of trips, and they have to keep this up to date. Now, we relied on the staff to go ahead and enter it manually into a Google Sheet that I had access to. But people weren't always keeping up to date with it, and it was causing some issues. With TrackUp now, it automatically keeps count of what trips they're doing, and then also it generates a trip log that they can then have on their phone to produce to a park ranger or anything like that. That's automatically updated. I don't have to rely on them or myself to update these trips, which has been huge for our guides. So
That's super cool. One last question for you before we jump over to Eric. Outside of the system and everything that we're talking about here, what are some things you've learned over the years of just managing, being an operations manager, managing guides the way that you have? You've done a really great job with it. What tips would you have for someone else who's in this similar role?
I would say probably the biggest thing that I've learned is to set expectations early on, before you even start scheduling. Even in the hiring process, letting employees know how your company operates as far as scheduling goes. Let them know kind of what to expect as far as like what trips they'll be running. We run multi-days and day trips, and typically our day trips are for staff that are newer, and multi-days tend to be for that staff that's a little bit more experienced. And setting those expectations early and often, has been a big help, and let them know the whys. And sometimes it was hard for me at the beginning because I couldn't um, communicate the why sometimes, and it would make people upset. And so I've tried to develop that skill as to why one person is being scheduled here or there. And I think over communication and letting them know goes a lot further than just saying it's because I said so. Being able to set those expectations, over communicate, and then also sticking to a schedule of how you schedule. That sounds a little redundant, but my employees know that they can expect to see their schedule at least 2 weeks out. And that puts a lot of pressure on me to get it done, but they know that they can expect to see a schedule 2 weeks out. And if it's not done, they are more than welcome to reach out to me. But I have to stick to that schedule, and that has also saved a lot of heartache as well. So
Awesome. Love it, Carter. Those are great tips. And just to give some context here before we jump over to Eric, Western River Expeditions and Moab Adventure Center are maybe a little bit unique from other operations in that they do have guide housing. So all of these guides they're committed for the season, right? And they're there, they're on site. So where some others might say, "Oh my gosh, 2 weeks seems like a short period of time. What, these people need to get things on
right.
their calendar months out." That's just some additional context for you to kind of understand. If you're working with people who are doing, multi-day tours internationally or something like that, maybe they need to know something's on their schedule much farther out. But of course, you
Totally.
could utilize the tools to do it that way. There's just the way that this operation runs,
Totally.
a little bit
Yep,
different. So
absolutely.
awesome. Thank you, Carter. Eric, let's jump over to you. So again, Eric it comes from a really unique perspective. As I mentioned in the beginning, 22 years in the industry, came from a river guide to operations manager to company owner. So he has sat in all of these seats, has a really great perspective that way, and spent a lot of time this last year in TrackUp utilizing the platform. He's been with Resmark for how many years now, Eric? Long time, a lot of years.
15 plus. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely understands that platform as well, so he can give us a really unique perspective. But there are a lot of similarities between Orange Torpedo Trips and Western River Expeditions Moab Adventure Center, but there's also some nuances that are quite different. So while you might see some things that are kind of similar to maybe the way he did it and does it now, you're going to also see some things that are different, and hopefully you'll be able to pick out some things there that resonate with you and your business. So talk to us, Eric, a little bit about some of the pain points you were experiencing before utilizing this platform. What was your life like trying to schedule guides?
Yeah, I think some kind of context about our unique business, because we are, I think, in the grand scheme of things, pretty unique in what we do and the challenges that that creates. So when I took over running the company, we had 30 to 40 employees, primarily out of one location with, 5 or 6 that would head up to Idaho and just do Idaho stuff. And it was really easy. You just tell them what their schedule is for 2 months, and then you'd see them in 2 months when they came back. And today we have somewhere between 130 and 150 employees operating in multiple states. And we do guided trips from the 4-hour half day to the 14, day multi-day kind of a thing. But then we also, and what's I think kind of unique, is we have a rental business out of both locations, one pretty significant, one a little less significant, but both require a fair amount of staff. And then, you're scheduling office staff, you're scheduling shuttle drivers. We have a big shuttle business, so we're scheduling shuttle stuff. And rentals often involve dropping off, picking up equipment, all of that kind of stuff. And especially in the rental support and the guided business, we're utilizing a lot of the same employees. So you may guide a half-day trip today and then drive 4 hours to go drop off a raft at Hell's Canyon Dam for a rental tomorrow, and utilizing those same people across multiple things. When I started, back to the kind of the spreadsheet that you saw, I'd have my reservation system open in one screen and I'd have my spreadsheet in another screen. And you're trying to put the trips in, and then you're trying to figure out who's going to guide them. And I would like literally print them out and like tack them to a board that everybody could see. And then we eventually moved over to Google Calendar. And we actually used that for a long time because people could see it on their phones, and you'd add them and then they could check the little box that they accepted it, like it was a Google, like it was like a meeting. And so you could see that they saw it, because especially when you're, I'm a hustler and I'll take a phone call at 8 o'clock at night and say, oh yeah, I'll book 7 people on that trip tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and then go find guides. And if you're texting, you're sending out, invites at 8 o'clock at night, you need to know that they saw it and that they're going to show up the next morning. And so Google Cal was really good for that. But, you know, from there we tried so many systems, because like I wanted a system that I could see the people. I wanted an ability to make sure I didn't double book people. So we tried all sorts of scheduling software. I went to industry after industry, and nobody had the multi-day component. There was no system out there that easily accommodated for booking somebody for 6 straight days without going to making individual day things. And it just was a nightmare. But I think the heart of the problems was there was no good software that specialized in sort of the tour business industry. There was these two systems, and Carter used the word import. Like I imported from Resmark into my spreadsheet. I don't know about in his version. In my version, import meant I manually put it for. I looked at Resmark and I manually typed it into this other one. And I cannot tell you how many times a trip that was booked for, like in Resmark, it's in there as an AM half day. And in my spreadsheet, somehow magically it turned into a PM half day. Like 5 times a season, at least, that would happen. And guides would be all set for that PM half day. And then the guests would show up at 8 a.m., 4 hours early. And that causes a bit of a hustle in the morning. So like that problem, it's just the two separate system issue causes so many doors, like opportunities for just mistakes. I would double schedule guides, because in our system, unlike that spreadsheet, we moved over to the Google one, I'd have a piece of paper with all of my staff in front of me, and then I'd be going and adding them into like Google Cal. And it, again, a couple times a year, usually the guides would catch it, but I would, hey, you're on a 3-day trip, and on day 2 of your 3-day trip, you're also booked on a half-day AM over here. And maybe on day 3 of your 3-day trip, you're supposed to be doing a shuttle over here. And I double book guides just because the system was so, there's just all those opportunities when they're separate systems. I think the other problems were there was no good way to manage, like no good way to manage time off. Um, Sort of back to that social problem when the guides can see what everything that's going on, that opens doors for lots of conflict and hurt feelings and everything else that are kind of unnecessary. And so there's just a lot of time dealing with that. When you're doing it manually, if I made last minute changes, a lot of times we just wouldn't go into the system and update the system. So if you're ever going back to verify stuff for payroll, you were never really sure if what you had was accurate. Like you weren't that confident that it was accurate. And then I think the final thing is just getting information to guides. The more information you can get to your guides about the expectations, the trip, if there's unique people or unique needs, if there's a birthday or whatever, guides rise to the occasion and love to run good trips. And so if you can get that data, and when there's these separate systems, they would get the trip roster in the morning of their trip, and that's where all that information would be. And by then it's too late for them to do anything about it. So
Yeah,
those are the problems we've had.
that's awesome. Um, so walk us through, and feel free to share screen if you want to, but maybe walk us through how some of these things were solved with the new platform and the integration with
Yeah.
Resmo.
So I'll go ahead and share my screen if I can get this to work. Go technology. So you can see, here's our track up. This was a July. This is what our July looked like. And this is month view, and you can do week view, and you could do day view and all of that, depending on kind of the complexity. But a couple things I loved about this is one, the integrating piece, Resmark, trip would be booked, it would bump it in here. And then it would, we could set up color codes. So it's really easy to see kind of different trips and everything else just based on color coding. Amazing. We have multiple states we operate in. And I don't want to see, like if I'm doing scheduling for Idaho, I don't want to see everything that's going on in Oregon, but the Oregon guy wants to see everything that's going on in Oregon. And so, you know, if you set things up, those trips will only load into those calendars. So the Oregon scheduler sees Oregon trips, sees Oregon employees, sees Oregon equipment, and the Idaho scheduler sees, Idaho, or you can toggle back and forth and all of those things. But makes it so like for me overseeing all of it, I can go see it all, but the Idaho person can see Idaho, the Oregon person can see Oregon, and it's great.
That's
The
super cool.
integration,
You could divide that up too, Eric, between like, so geographically, but can you also do it even by business segments if you wanted to? Like these are
absolutely.
my off-road tours, my rafting tours, my national park tours. So however you want to, whatever divisions you want to make is up to you, I guess, right?
Yeah, these teams could be totally customized for your business. Like we toyed with a bunch of different versions where it's like, I just want to see rentals and shuttles, or I want to see, so there's lots of ways to use this that I think would be really helpful. And if you have different segments that include different equipment or different guides within one location, this can be really helpful. For us at our size, this was sort of the format that worked the best. The integration piece, like Resmark trips automatically loading in here, I cannot, like, there is no words I could use or way that I could overstate how impactful that was to my life. Like, my Oregon manager literally told me, if you get rid of this, I quit. Like, this was one of the biggest changes operationally to our business in years. And I change things every year. I'm a big, like, let's grow, let's change. If it's broke, if it's not broke, let's maybe break it and see if we can make it better. Like, I'm a like change person. Nothing has been as impactful for like manager scheduler life as this integration piece has, because you're not doing this two screen thing that weirdly takes a lot of mental power. Like, come July, like sleeping like 5 hours a night, dealing with 1,000 problems, broken down vehicles somewhere, like every little like share of your brain power is going to something, and it takes a surprising amount of focus to make sure that all the trips accurately get put in your scheduling system. So that's done automatically, just takes a huge burden away. And then the piece that Carter talked about a little bit, you go into a trip and you go to add guide, and because you've set up who has permissions to do what, it just pops up and shows you who's available. Like, you know that if they're there, they're not scheduled on something else. So you're not worried about double scheduling guides, which I did so much. You also can then, go through, like, especially for day trips for us, I'll rotate around maybe who the head guide is. If I've got 5 third-year guides or second-year guides doing day trips, I want to share the love of who gets paid more and who gets to be in charge, and kind of see what their leadership style is and how they're developing. In our old system, like in Google Cal, it's just whoever I put in first on the list was going to be the head guide. That was kind of our system. But then in the last minute, I'm going through and just typing people in, and it just often created confusion. This makes it real easy. This is the person in charge. All the guides see it. Another thing that's important for us, because we're often operating sort of towards capacity, is managing equipment. I've got 16-foot rafts. I got 14-foot rafts. You can put 8 people in one and 6 in another. If I've got a really busy day trip, I may need that 16-foot raft next Saturday. But if the 6-day trip just says I need a raft, and they go grab one of my 16-foot rafts, they may have a 16-foot raft on a 6-day trip for 4 people just because they wanted the bigger boat for whatever reason. But that means then I don't have space for all of my people on Saturday, 3 days into their trip. So we could actually use this not just to schedule staff, which it's nice because you can go in here and see what everybody's booked. We also manage equipment. So when I go in and a guide is looking at their schedule, so if Ryan here is looking at, he gets into his app, sees this, he'll also see what rafts they need for when they pack. So they're not coming to me saying, what equipment should we take? It's all listed out right on their app. They know what boats to go grab, and it's all set up to make sure that that doesn't cause me problems down the road 3 days, 4 days after they've left. It also is nice because the notes and everything from Resmark will populate in, so they have access to all of that. So they know if they've got, dietary restrictions as they're starting to think about menus. They know if they've got things to celebrate. They know if they've got somebody who's been a bunch of times, because they can actually get in and access who's on the trip and all of that kind of stuff. And then for me, it's nice because I can put notes in when I'm doing the scheduling and know that they have access to that. Like if there's something about that trip, or if they're going to take a weird vehicle, or if it's like, hey, I want you to think about taking this frame because of some unique thing, it's really easy for me to communicate with them. All just really like wildly helpful. The combination of no opportunities or far reduced opportunities for screw ups because of the lack of manual labor, mixed with the increase in communication, the ability to manage equipment, all of these things like solved so many of my problems.
I love that. You mentioned a couple of times, Eric, the app. So there is an app that people can download from the App Store and they are able to access. Obviously, this view you're showing us here, this is not what they see. This is kind of the manager's view, but I don't know that we can show that here on our screen, but maybe just talk about that a little bit. What is this like from the guide's perspective? You said they can kind of get in, see that. Maybe it looks kind of like what you just saw on that pop-up. Is that similar to what they see when they go in and see their schedule?
Yeah, my memory is they basically see this. They'll see who their fellow guides are. They'll see the equipment. They'll see notes in here. And then they ultimately can have access. They can get in to see some of the passenger information. And, this is also really helpful for us. One of the things, the integration with Resmark, unlike a lot of companies, our specialization in inflatable kayaking, we have people, they'll choose to inflatable kayak, or they'll choose to be in a paddle boat, or they'll choose to ride an oar boat. And what boats they choose can dictate how many guides I send, because we actually have guides in inflatable kayaks. And so if I have a full trip of paddle boat people, that's one guide for every 6 or 8 guests. If I have a full trip of inflatable kayak people, that's one guide for every 3 to 4 guests. And so I can get in really quickly, see what boat types people have set up for, and then that'll help me understand how many guides I need to schedule and all that kind of stuff as well. But they can get in here and see, all the information that we've requested. If they have, day trips, medical issues, all of these things, this is all information they now have access to that I don't have to hand them. They don't have to wait till the day of the trip to get it. I don't have to, personally go talk to them about it. They can see it and then come ask me if there's questions or whatever. But they have access to all this, and it's awesome. It's super empowering for them to take ownership of the trip that they're running and really run higher quality experiences.
That's really cool. And I saw down in the corner they can actually see all of the guest names and ages and so forth there too, so they get a really nice picture of kind of what the group dynamics might be ahead of
Yeah.
time and
Yep.
plan for that. That's great.
Yeah. That part's really nice.
Anything else they can do in the app that you feel like was really valuable to them? Like
Yeah.
you
Especially in the day trip space, the ability to swap trips
Hmm.
is really helpful because again, they can kind of take me out of it. Like they don't need to come ask me. In the Google, when we did the Google Cal, they could see who was working and they could see who wasn't, they could sort of infer who wasn't working and come to me with a list of maybe, this person can take my trip. And then when we switched over to trying to do it through other scheduling software, they couldn't see what other people were doing. So they didn't have any idea. And in this, they can sort of offer to swap trips or, go to swap and they can see who's available. It just empowers them in ways that doesn't create some of the social conflict, but also saves me from having to go figure it all out and everything else. They can just come to me with a solution or they can do it in here and I can just, yep, that works for me. Great, done, problem solved. The other piece that they can do through here is time off. We've had a real issue in the past with managing time off requests. There's just no system, the Google Calendar system, none of it worked all that well. People would just come to us and say, hey, I'm going to be gone. And then by the time you get there, you'd realize that like 7 of your core people are all gone for the same 3-day holiday. They submit it. We have the ability to see who else has time off in that period, makes it very obvious. And then you can approve, deny, etc. You actually have ownership of making sure that you don't lose 80% of your staff on a 3-day period in a way that's, again, like doesn't take all of your brain space to try and manage. It just makes it pretty seamless, pretty easy. It's great.
Love that. So I'm going to ask kind of a technical question here just to make sure I'm understanding this, but you had that section that sort of shows which trips are actually on the schedule. Obviously, when you set out to build a season, or maybe Resmark is actually, automatically generating inventory for you. I know in our system we do that a lot. We'll have like, oh, it just follows these rules, this trip leaves every Tuesday, or this one is daily at 9 a.m. or whatever. And so it's already built all of this. But that doesn't necessarily mean, if our season starts on March 1st and goes all the way through October 31st, it doesn't mean we're going to operate 100% of those days. And if I put all of that into the calendar initially, it might be like, blah, like, oh my gosh, this thing is so loaded, and I don't necessarily want to schedule guides on trips that I don't have anyone on yet. So at what point does that inventory item there that's, your specific trip show up? Does it show up right out of the gate when it's generated, or does it wait until somebody's actually booked on it?
Ours shows up in here, and maybe Aaron, if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they don't show up until someone's booked on it, until it's like a live trip. I don't have people on it. Which again is great for me. I don't want to go through and say like, am I going to schedule somebody for a non-existent trip? It's how many passengers, and then I can go add the guides. But if it's in here, I know it's something I need to schedule. And if
Yeah.
it's not in here, then I'm not going to worry about it unless I know it's coming or something like that. And I think one of the other things that's important for us, we don't manage our rental sort of issues. Like we don't have that integration because I just couldn't figure out a good way to do it that would be meaningful. So, I'm still in one sense doing the Resmark thing where it's like I've got a Resmark rental side open and I know I need to drop off or pick up, like Heller Bar, that's probably a pickup. So I know that we've got a rental drop off or a rental pickup on this date because I looked in Resmark. So we set up items that I go manually add in here. So you don't just have to use this from an integration standpoint. You can also use it for things that aren't integrated. Our Oregon office, we use it around scheduling office. We created shifts, and then you can just create those as a regular repeat thing and then go schedule for them for like somebody answering phones, that kind of thing. But this item here, Heller Bar pickup, this is somebody going to pick up a raft rental. I put the notes in about they're looking for 2 rafts, etc. But we pre-built these shifts. So it's really easy just to create a new shift, pop it on here, and then again, same thing. I can add a guide, and if they pop up, it means I know they're available to go do this in that time frame. But it's not an integrated ResMark thing. So you can use this software both for the integrated pieces, but then also for your stuff that doesn't make sense to integrate, but you're utilizing the same staff, et cetera. So that's been really helpful.
That's actually a really, really cool thing that I think probably applies to a lot of businesses out there. Is there anything you mentioned, the nuances of your business being a bit different where you have the rental business and the shuttles and so forth. Is there anything about rentals or shuttles besides what you've shown us already that has kind of, made this a really useful tool besides, beyond sort of what you talked about with the trip scheduling?
Um, again, sort of because we're using the same staff, the ability to schedule them, the support for those services in the same place has been really helpful. Um, outside of that, I don't know because we manage that inventory, the rental inventory differently, like separately than we do the guided trip inventory. And so that integration hasn't made as much sense. I do think one thing I would add that is kind of a cool feature is for a lot of these trips, like our half-day trips, we'll, especially in Idaho where we've got guides living on the property, we'll utilize someone who's not guiding today. Maybe they'll be the person that'll drive the van to go drop the trip off in the morning. So every time that event pops into TrackUp, you're going to need a driver. But that driver's not gone or out of the office or unavailable for the full period of the trip. They're only unavailable for the first 30 minutes or whatever. So we were able to create an item in here, put in driver, that, it's one of the guides or whatever, but it'll pop up and I can select somebody, make them the put in driver. It only takes them off the calendar for a shorter period. That sort of drop down option, instead of being unavailable for the full, 4 hours or whatever, instead of 12:30 to 4, if you're in that position within the roster, you're only going to be unavailable for 45 minutes. So you can get scheduled for other stuff.
That's really cool. And it uses the start time of the
Of the trip.
product to calculate that. That's really cool.
And that's been super powerful for us because we'll use somebody as a put in driver or a pickup driver or whatever, but then it still allows them to be available for other things.
Yeah, really, really cool. Okay. Well, we're getting to the point where we can answer any questions that anyone has. So I'm going to ask Eric just a couple more questions, but if there are any questions that any of you have about anything that's been talked about, guide scheduling in general, anything, put those into the chat down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll jump over to those in just a second here. But Eric, before I ask you some general questions about just what you've learned over the years, is there anything else you want to show on the technical side of this that you've
I
learned?
don't think so. I mean, I think we've really kind of covered most of it. It's the thing is, these are the ways that I've chosen to use this, but some of these features could be rethought. Thinking about like the Idaho versus Oregon for us, that could be used depending on your business a lot of different ways. What you manage in sort of the inventory side, there's a lot of different ways you could utilize that. We used it for rafts, but you could use it for vans, you could use it for trailers, you could use it for, hell, probably down to the point of like camping, different types of core camping equipment or whatever. There's a lot of functionality and options here that we're just starting to kind of get our head around. But it's pretty cool. Having looked at lots of scheduling software over the years, this is the first one that made sense for tourism outfitter business and our unique needs in the way that we run our operations.
Yeah. There are so many scheduling applications out there for restaurant staff, general, employees that just work certain day shifts or whatever. And there are just so many nuances to these businesses that we operate that are so different. So love what you've shown there. Outside of all the technology and everything, what are some things that you feel like you've learned over your 22 years in the industry that relate to this topic we're discussing here? Guide scheduling, guide management, anything that would be helpful to others here.
Yeah, as I've hired managers and handed over a lot of our scheduling of our local offices to them over the years, there's a few things that I always sort of you need to really focus on these things. And one of them is when you have a business like ours where it's single day and multi-day, and you share guides across those two activities, you know, maybe a single day activity, maybe a single guide today and a multi-day guide tomorrow. The single day business changes up to the last minute. And so from a scheduling standpoint, for me, it often made sense to wait as long as possible to put out that schedule, because it was inevitably, if I put it out 2 weeks ahead, it's going to change 400 times between, you know, when I put it out and when those trips run. And also, I may have a guide that's like got a really high skill set and they deserve or want to be on that multi-day trip, but I have a unique single day trip that like their skill set is really needed because of somebody with special needs or because of high water or because of like whatever that reason may be. So I was always incentivized to wait to the last minute, but that creates lots of social problems. I think it is better to treat people, you'll have happier people if you schedule early and then just modify from there. So we really focused on, I tell guides like you have to have the single day schedule up at least a week out, and ideally the bare bones of it 2 weeks out if you can, and then multi-days, you know, 2 to 3 weeks out to the greatest extent possible. And the more you can stay ahead of that, the happier your people will be, even if you're making modifications. And then I think the other thing is, as you make those modifications, just clear communication with people. I pull guides aside a lot and say like, listen, I would love to put you on that other trip, and but I need you to go do this one for whatever, for this reason. I need you on this trip, and like I'll do you a solid later, we'll get you on the right trip or whatever, but for today I need you to do this, I need you to lead this or whatever. And that clear communication. So the scheduling is the greatest, one of the greatest opportunities I think for just like social upheaval in your staff. And that doing it early and communicating clearly, I think is just, it's really, really essential. And then I think the final thing I would say is, we've tried to do this in the past, and this software really opened the door for us to do it well, but is to get as much information and opportunity for ownership and empowerment to your staff as possible. It's because they want to run great trips, but they need that information to do it. And so the more you can build systems to help them know the details of the trips they're running and give them the opportunity to be creative and make them special, they usually will rise to that occasion.
Love it. Great tips, Eric. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Carter and Aaron. I'm going to run through a few questions here that have come through, and I don't, you know, we can kind of direct these. Each of you may have a slightly different take on some of these, so it's, you know, feel free to be thinking and be able to answer these. I may answer just a couple as we go here, but first question is from Marcio Franco. He says, "Is this a two-way sync with the booking system?" So, Aaron, feel free to jump in here with this, but my understanding is we're pushing things from Resmark directly into TrackUp, but they happen pretty frequently. But we're not going to see like all of the things that are scheduled over here in the scheduling system pushed back over into the booking platform, right? All the notes that are added, the changes that are made, cancellations, additions, all of that kind of stuff is coming over into the or into the scheduling platform, but not necessarily pushing back the other way. So you kind of have this endpoint where everything is gathered and scheduled, but it's happening, you know, fairly real time that way. Have I described that okay?
Yeah, specifically from the context of the connection between TrackUp and ResMark, it is a one single directional thing. Because you guys don't have any employee information, we're not sending any data back to you guys. We're just pulling in that trip and bookings data so that we can work with it.
Yeah, and I think it allows for the tracking or the scheduling system to be pretty robust, like you've seen, because you can have all of that employee information and qualifications and what they're linked to and all that. You don't have to worry about that being on the other side of the equation as well. And then it ties into the app and all of that kind of stuff that they have. And just a side note, Marcio, it sounds like you're using Fair Harbor. The integration right now is with Resmark. Happy to discuss that solution with you as well. If you're really liking what this guide scheduling system looks like, it might be something to consider. See if it's Resmark might be a fit for your operation to utilize this. For now, that's where the integration is. I don't know if it will be, with some of these other solutions in the future, but that's what that looks like today. And then Nick Allen says, is there a way to pull guide schedules for payroll? I think this is a great question because it's kind of the next thing you think of. Like, okay, we got all these people scheduled, exactly what they've done. Can we associate this with payroll? Eric, Carter, have you guys utilized this for payroll? I know both of you touched on that a little bit, but how does that work with your payroll systems?
I'll just go ahead and answer that real quick on our end. We have a separate payroll software. So guides have a separate app, of course, and where they clock in if they're doing hourly or they post their trip or whatever. What I have used this for though, with some regularity, especially the way that in that app they go through and they put trips in or whatever, is just to go back and verify. You know, I'll be running payroll and I won't see a trip on somebody's, and I'm like, I thought they were on that trip, and go back and see if they just had forgotten to put it in, which does happen. And then I know I can put it in because I can verify it through here. So that has been really helpful. I think the other thing that we have used this for is our end of season reporting requires us to, run spreadsheets for the feds saying, on this date, we ran this many guests for this many dollars with this many guides and even this many boats. And now I have an easy way to go back and get that information on how many staff and how many boats were actually on those trips that day. So it's not payroll, but it is a post-use report kind of a thing that this data has been really helpful on.
Yeah. So government reporting, payroll validation, all that kind of stuff. Carter, has your experience been any different, or how have you used it that way?
Very, very similar to how Eric's company does it. We do have a separate app that they go on, but we use TrackUp to verify it. But also another big piece of it, because it's a lot more accurate, getting guide gratuities that come in after the fact to the right staff. It streamlined that process and made it much more accurate. So if there's a tip that's left for a group of 5 guides on that trip, they know exactly, they can say with 99% surety that these are the 5 guides that get these gratuities instead of trying to, clue your way into who gets what. So.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. And we've been
If I could
discussing.
jump in
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron. Mention some.
just really quickly, we do offer custom reporting. Like we can generate a CSV or an Excel spreadsheet with any of the data in our system. And if a particular report is requested often enough, then that it makes sense to build it into the system, then we would also be willing to do that as well. That's kind of where a lot of the currently existing reports came from, is just things that somebody needed more than once. And so we just ended up putting a button in there for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And gratuities were mentioned there. We are discussing some solutions to kind of weave something like that together into this solution somehow to, be able to better facilitate that now that you know exactly what trips, the guides have been on, what guests are there, and be able to facilitate that so that if people aren't carrying cash, which is so common these days, they have an easy way to, Venmo or pay otherwise outside of cash gratuities. Okay, Pat Smith has another question. This is a good one. And Pat, feel free to unmute if I misstate this, but I'm going to sort of summarize it this way. It sounds like in Pat's system, she is utilizing what in Resmark we call resource management, meaning there are guides or other objects or things that are equipment that are associated with tours, and multiple tours share those. Such that when someone is taken out of the pool, it affects availability not just for one tour, but maybe across the others. And so Pat is wondering, does this, once you've scheduled them over here on this in the scheduling side, does it come back into the booking platform and make that association kind of on the resource management side to where they would be taken out of availability? The answer to that, from my understanding, is no, because it doesn't really have that two-way communication. So you would really have to set that up in a way that, on the ResTech side of things, it's recognizing that you have a certain number of individuals allocated to this, and as you decrement those numbers, it's also decrementing the availability across this. So it's accurate, but the actual assignment of the individuals to the various tours is happening over here in the scheduling system. So could the two play together nicely? I think so, but it wouldn't be sort of on a, name basis where you would have that name pushing back over and know exactly who it was that was scheduled to cause. That would be more of a number basis on the res platform and name basis in the scheduling platform. Let me know if I've not answered that correctly, Pat, but hopefully that helps. James has a question. Oh, somebody else wanted to throw something in. Eric?
Well, just so because we use that same sort of, resource management function. I use it all the time for managing all sorts of things from user days to, in our Idaho office, we allow as a base number I've set for like 50 people across half-day trips, full-day trips. So you can't have 50 book on a full-day trip and 50 book on a half-day trip that overlap because we just don't have the capacity for 100 people. And 80% of the time, like those numbers generally work. But what this calendar view has given me, especially because we manage equipment through here and the guides, is for that 20% of the time when those numbers, like the general number I use is correct, I can now visually see problems coming way further out than I used to be able to because it's automatically loading into the system. So, in the past, I would go into our scheduling software 2 weeks out and start putting all the trips in. And then I'd be a week out and realize, I've got a problem. Whereas here, I can look 2 months ahead and see what's booked just in this sort of visual calendar and recognize, like, oh no, okay. But now I've got 2 months to solve that problem. So, in sort of that same vein, this does help with some of those problems.
Yeah, love that. Okay, James has a series of questions. James, these are great, and I think some of these, Aaron, get ready for these because these are actually a lot. I think so the answer to some of these it doesn't do this yet, but these are really great suggestions that your questions bring up here. So James actually runs Backside Tours. It's a private multi-day group ski tours business. He says this has addressed a lot of his frustrations that he has. But he has a few questions with this. So does it link to waiver sign to ensure that all participants have signed waivers before departure? And Aaron, I don't think that waiver sign was brought over into the scheduling side of things because Resmark kind of, you still see all of that there, right? But that's a thought because if guides are looking at the manifest in the app, it might be nice to see that as you look at that, at check-in or whatever, that, okay, everybody's checked in, all balances are paid, all waivers are signed, we're in good shape, which is something that's already included in the manifest. So it might be easy to show, unless I'm wrong and we're already doing that.
Not currently showing waiver sign, but we are capable of displaying any information that gets sent from Resmark. So it would be a very quick adjustment if that's something that somebody wanted.
Yeah. I like that idea, James, because
Well, let me add to that a little bit. They do get don't they get the manifest? Oh, it's a different version of the manifest, so it doesn't have it. I thought it did.
it's kind of a
Yeah.
recreated version of the manifest, I think, that uses all of the data
Yeah.
to format it. But that data is there. So I think the answer is, James, it could be added. And then you'd be able to have a single location to kind of do that final check. Like Eric has said, it's nice to see all the notes associated with guests, but have they signed the waiver is an important piece of data. So I like that. I like that thought. And then his next one is we have checklists that guides are required to fulfill throughout the trip that are not part of Resmark. Is there any way to integrate these? That's an interesting thought. Sort of on like each trip might have its own checklist, and if you're logged into this see this thing, you kind of have a requirement to go through this outside checklist that you store inside the scheduling system. Aaron, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's an idea maybe to tuck away and take a look at. I think it's a
I mean, if this is something that you're interested in, I'd definitely be willing to hop on another call sometime and discuss in detail what that looks like. But just like right off the top of my head, you could probably just have your staff put in notes on each trip once they completed each item on your checklist, and just like, oh, I'm not even really sure what this checklist looks like, but did like the pre-chip check, or I packed or whatever, and just put it in the notes, and that would share it with you as a manager and all the other team members.
Okay. Is there a shareable guide profile that can be shared with participants in pre-trip communication? That's a cool idea too, because I don't think there is yet, but that's a fun idea to say, hey, you know, your trip's coming up and these are your guides that you're going to have on the trip, kind of preparing them for that, you know, maybe a day in advance. They know the names of the guides, and that could be fun communication that went out to people in advance just to connect them more to the company and the guides, and set some expectations there. I think that's fun.
If I could jump in really quickly, Carter just messaged me and said that the waiver sign stuff is actually coming over for the Mob Adventure Center in the manifest data. So that is currently visible from the trip scheduling page, whether they've signed or not.
Oh, well, there you go. Check that one off. Okay. So this other one, I think these are good ideas, James. The last one is, can they add the schedule to their own calendars? So, for example, Google Calendar, I assume. Is that what you're saying, where they could kind of say, hey, I'm scheduled on this, add to my calendar, add to iCal or Google Calendar or whatever it might be. Is that something that's been thought about or available?
Yeah, we support any app, like calendar application that takes an iCal feed, so Google Calendar, Apple Calendar. Generally speaking, those are a little bit less reliable than the mobile app because of the way that those feeds work. They only update every like hour or so, whereas the app is real time. But if you got somebody that doesn't want the app for some reason, then you can have them import their schedule into their Google Calendar, and it'll stay up to date. It'll just be a little bit more delayed.
That's really cool. Okay, last couple, you guys. I know we're just a couple minutes over here, but awesome, awesome questions. Um, if you did want to stick with your current booking engine, there's not an integration. Could you use this as a standalone tool? For example, could you import all your bookings? Could you kind of set it up? And I think, yeah, with some work, I mean, Eric kind of showed how he's doing that with his office staff and things that are not in Resmark. So as those are coming in, you could do that, and guides could have the app and see their schedule. You would just need to plug in the trips that are actually scheduled and set up your employees and kind of keep it up to date with how many people you have booked. So I think for certain operations, that are really predictable, especially, that might work really well. For example, we have a Grand Canyon operation that, 99% of our trips are sold out all the time, which is fantastic. And so we kind of know exactly how many people we're going to have on every trip. We can do the schedule a year in advance, which we do, um, and that's really easy to plan for. So something like that, especially where you kind of have a predictable schedule, you could easily plug things in and do that. But you could also keep it up to date. So that's a great question, Cheryl. And then Nick
Yeah,
mentioned, oh yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
just really quickly, we do, sorry to keep breaking in here. Um, we do integrate with lots of providers. From our side of things, the best connection as far as the booking engine go is by far Resmark. Like the way that their system works with ours is very clean and nice. If you have another bookings engine, my first piece of advice would be switch to Resmark. But if you're really committed to sticking with yours, we could also talk about building a connection to whatever one you're on. If you were interested in that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Couple last ones. I don't know that this is a question so much. Nick from Alaska Alpine just mentioned that permit reporting was his next question, which I think, Eric, you touched on. He has the same thing with the national parks, a lot of reporting at the end of the season. So I think that end of season reporting concept would work well there as well. Um, and then Cheryl had one more question. Oliver guides are freelancers, which seems like a slightly different model from maybe what Eric and Carter shared. Does the tool allow me to offer a tour to a guide rather than just allocate? Their availability is very dynamic as they create their own work. So I imagine Cheryl's kind of saying, hey, I have work available. Who would like it? Versus I'm your manager and I'm going to assign you to this. That's it. That is a very different model. Has that been thought about, Aaron, at all, or do you see a way to?
We do have a system for employees to approve or reject shifts. It's not super common for our current clients to reject shifts. But if you had like a freelance model or something of that, employees could go in and pick which shifts that you scheduled them on that they actually wanted to work. Um, and then you could run from there based on the feedback they gave you.
Yeah. Could you potentially assign multiple guides, knowing that you only need one, like two guides, but you sort of send it out there to six, and once you have the first two, the other four can't take the shift? Like, does it work that way at all, or not quite?
Because nobody uses this feature, we haven't put a lot of time into making it better. If somebody wanted to start using it in that way, we could definitely build in stuff like that to make it streamlined. It wouldn't be a very big project. We would just want to be working side by side with somebody that wanted it to work that way, so we can make sure that the new feature actually worked out in the way that people were imagining.
Awesome. Okay. Excellent. Okay, James has a great question to wrap us up. How do we book a follow-up one-on-one meeting? Um, so I think you can, if you want to, if you're a Resmart client, reach out to our support team. They'll set you up directly with Aaron, and you can get that set up. I don't know, Aaron, if you want to create a calendar link or something like that for your schedule, that might make things easier if you have a few people that are looking to do that. Aaron also just put his email. If you want to send a message directly to him, you can do that and schedule something there as well. So awesome. Lots of good questions, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Any last questions or comments from anyone before we wrap it up? Please send them.
Do we want to, just real quick, Brandon, since a lot of
Yep.
people are going to be watching the replay, do we want to go over pricing or anything in case people watching have a question?
Yeah, well, let's touch on that really quick, because I'm sure that is a question. So everything we talked about today, including the app for guides and all of the back-end scheduling software integration, everything is available. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Aaron, but $2.50 per guide, basically per employee who you're scheduling. That gives them their own account there and access and everything. And I believe it really kind of follows. I know there's a lot of seasonality in a lot of the businesses that I know that are here with us now. And so that's not like 12 months out of the year, right, Aaron? That's kind of the operating season when they're actually utilizing that. Am I stating that correctly?
Yeah, I guess I'll try to say this as succinctly as possible. We have a $10 a month minimum charge, and then you pay $2.50 per user that you schedule every month. So if it's December and none of your guides are working, then you only have to pay the minimum charge of $10. And if it's June and you've got 1,000 people working every month, then you'll pay for each person that you schedule. So we set it up to kind of work with the seasonality of a lot of these tour operators, so they don't have to pay a huge charge all year round for stuff they're not using.
Yeah, makes sense. Tons of value in that too. I mean, the amount of time savings alone with whatever your number is, I think is pretty phenomenal. So you would make that up nearly instantly by utilizing this. I think that's been Eric's experience and Carter's experience. The amount of time that they spent prior to this was dramatically greater than everything they've been able to save. So tons of value in that, and yeah. So hopefully, if you're not yet utilizing this, reach out to Aaron, get set up, reach out to our support team. They can help as well on the Resmark side, and we look forward to getting more people on board with this system. I think it's going to be a great solution for you, and we appreciate everybody. So thanks for joining us today.